Marcus Thompson had always been the type of person who believed life was meant to be lived with a smile and a sense of adventure. At 28 years old, he worked as a travel blogger, documenting his journeys across Europe for his growing online audience. His followers loved him for his spontaneous nature and his ability to find humor in the most ordinary situations. What they didn't know was that Marcus sometimes took his pranks a little too far. On this particular Tuesday morning in London, Marcus was staying at a small hotel near Buckingham Palace. He had planned to spend the day filming content about the famous changing of the guard ceremony. The weather was perfect, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that made walking around the city pleasant. Marcus grabbed his camera equipment, a fresh cup of coffee from the hotel lobby, and headed out with excitement bubbling in his chest. The streets around Buckingham Palace were already busy with tourists from all over the world. Marcus loved this energy. He set up his camera near the palace gates, adjusting the angle to capture both himself and the impressive building behind him. As he began recording his introduction, he noticed the crowd gathering for the ceremony that would begin in about an hour. "Hey everyone, Marcus here," he said into the camera with his usual enthusiasm. "I'm standing right outside Buckingham Palace, and in just a bit, we're going to witness one of London's most famous traditions. But first, let me tell you about this amazing coffee I got from my hotel." He held up his cup, steam still rising from the hot liquid inside. As Marcus continued filming, he spotted two guards standing perfectly still near the palace entrance. They wore the traditional red uniforms and tall black hats that tourists loved to photograph. Marcus had heard stories about how these guards were trained to remain completely motionless, no matter what happened around them. People often tried to make them laugh or react, but they were known for their incredible discipline. An idea began forming in Marcus's mind. He had seen countless videos online of tourists trying to get reactions from the King's Guard, usually without success. What if he could create content that would go viral? His followers were always asking for more exciting and unexpected content. This could be exactly what he needed to boost his channel's popularity. Marcus finished his current recording and pretended to review the footage while actually planning his next move. He noticed that one of the guards was standing slightly away from the main crowd area. The guard appeared young, probably new to his position, and Marcus thought this might make his prank even more entertaining for his audience. The coffee in Marcus's hand was still quite hot, but not scalding. He had been drinking it slowly during his filming. In his mind, throwing a small splash of coffee would be harmless and fun. He imagined the guard might flinch or show some small reaction, which would make for great content. Marcus had always believed that life was too short to take everything seriously, and he assumed others shared his light-hearted approach to unexpected situations. He positioned his camera at an angle where it would capture both himself and the guard. Marcus made sure the recording was running before he began walking casually toward the guard's position. His heart was beating faster with excitement. This was going to be the kind of spontaneous content that his followers loved most. The guard stood perfectly still, looking straight ahead with the discipline that the King's Guard was famous for. Marcus approached within a few feet, pretending to stumble slightly as if he had tripped over something on the ground. In what he thought was a smooth, casual motion, he let some of his coffee splash toward the guard. The warm liquid hit the guard's red uniform, creating a dark stain across the chest area. Marcus immediately began laughing, thinking this was exactly the kind of harmless prank that would entertain his audience. He expected the guard to maybe break character for just a moment, perhaps to wipe off the coffee or give him a stern look. Instead, what happened next was completely different from what Marcus had imagined. The guard's expression changed immediately, but not in the way Marcus expected. Rather than annoyance or even anger, there was something else in the guard's eyes, something that made Marcus's laughter die in his throat. Within seconds, other guards appeared from positions Marcus hadn't even noticed. They moved with swift, professional precision that made it clear this was not going to be treated as a harmless joke. Marcus suddenly realized that his understanding of the situation had been completely wrong. The tourists around them began to notice the commotion. Some were taking photos and videos while others were moving away from the scene. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized that what he had thought would be a funny moment for his travel blog was turning into something much more serious. "Sir, you need to come with us," one of the guards said in a firm but calm voice. Marcus looked around, hoping to see someone who might help him explain that it was just a misunderstanding. just a harmless prank that had gone wrong. But the faces around him showed expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. As Marcus was led away from the crowd, his camera still recording everything, he began to understand that his simple coffee-throwing prank had consequences he never could have anticipated. The excitement he had felt just minutes earlier was now replaced by a growing sense that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The guard whose uniform he had stained walked beside the others, and Marcus noticed that despite the coffee stain, the young man maintained his professional composure. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested this incident was far more significant than Marcus had realized when he first got the idea to create what he thought would be entertaining content for his travel blog. Marcus found himself in a small room inside what appeared to be a security office within the palace grounds. The walls were plain white, and the only furniture was a simple table and 2 chairs. His camera equipment had been taken away, and he was told to wait while they decided what to do with him. The reality of his situation was beginning to sink in, and the confident smile he usually wore was nowhere to be found. 2 men in suits entered the room, introducing themselves as palace security officials. They sat across from Marcus, their expressions serious but not unkind. Marcus tried to explain that he was just a travel blogger who had made a mistake, that he meant no harm or disrespect. He emphasized that it was supposed to be a harmless prank for his online audience. "Mr. Thompson," one of the officials said, looking at a file they had apparently already compiled about him, "we understand you work as a travel content creator. However, what you did today cannot be dismissed as simply a prank. The King's Guard represents centuries of tradition and service to the Crown. Any action that appears to disrespect or assault a member of the Guard is taken very seriously." Marcus felt his throat go dry. The word assault made everything sound much worse than he had intended. He tried to explain again that he had only thrown a small amount of coffee, that he never meant to hurt anyone or show disrespect. But as he spoke, he realized how his actions must have looked to others who didn't know his intentions. The second official leaned forward. "The guard you targeted, Private James Williams, is actually quite remarkable. He's only been serving for 6 months, but he's already distinguished himself in several ways. What you don't know, Mr. Thompson, is that Private Williams has an interesting background that makes your actions today rather ironic." Marcus looked confused. He couldn't understand what they meant by ironic, or why the guard's background would matter. All he knew was that he was in serious trouble for what he had thought was a harmless joke. "Private Williams comes from a family that has served the Crown for generations," the first official continued. "His grandfather was a guard. His father served in the military, and James chose to follow in their footsteps. But what makes him special is not just his family history. 3 months ago, Private Williams helped save a tourist who had collapsed near the palace gates. He broke protocol to provide first aid until medical help arrived." The story made Marcus feel even worse about his actions. He had targeted someone who was not only doing his job with honor, but who had actually helped people. Marcus began to understand that his prank had not been harmless fun, but rather an attack on someone who deserved respect. Furthermore, the second official added, "Private Williams has been studying international relations in his free time. He speaks 4 languages and has expressed interest in diplomatic service after his military commitment. He's exactly the kind of young person who represents the best of British service." Marcus put his head in his hands. Every detail they shared made him feel more ashamed of what he had done. He had made assumptions about the guard without knowing anything about him as a person. In his mind, the guard had been just a prop for his content, not a real person with a life, dreams, and a record of helping others. "What's going to happen to me?" Marcus asked quietly. He was thinking about his travel blog, his career, and whether this incident would ruin everything he had worked to build. More importantly, he was beginning to worry about whether he had seriously hurt someone's career or reputation. The officials exchanged a look before the first one spoke. "That depends on several factors, Mr. Thompson. The incident was recorded by multiple cameras, including your own. The footage will be reviewed and a decision will be made about whether to pursue formal charges. In the meantime, you're free to go, but you must remain in London until this matter is resolved." Marcus nodded, feeling relieved that he wasn't being arrested immediately but still worried about what would happen next. As he was about to leave, one of the officials stopped him. "There is one thing you should know," the man said. "Private Williams has requested to speak with you. Normally this wouldn't be allowed, but given the circumstances and his exemplary record, his request is being considered." If you're willing to meet with him, it might help resolve this situation. Marcus was surprised. After what he had done, he couldn't imagine why the guard would want to speak with him. Part of him was afraid of the conversation, worried that he would face anger or demands for an apology that he wasn't sure how to give properly. But another part of him was curious about the person he had wronged. "Why would he want to talk to me?" Marcus asked. "You'll have to ask him that yourself," the official replied. "The meeting would be supervised and recorded for both of your protection. Think about it, and let us know your decision by tomorrow morning." As Marcus left the palace grounds, he felt completely different from when he had arrived that morning. His confidence was gone, replaced by guilt and uncertainty. The streets of London looked the same, but everything felt changed. Tourists were still taking photos and enjoying their visits, unaware of the drama that had unfolded just hours earlier. Marcus returned to his hotel room and sat on the bed, staring at his laptop screen. He had planned to edit and upload his morning footage, but now everything seemed pointless. His usual enthusiasm for creating content had disappeared, replaced by the weight of understanding how much damage a few seconds of poor judgment could cause. He thought about Private Williams and wondered what kind of person would want to meet with someone who had embarrassed him in front of tourists and cameras. Marcus had always prided himself on being able to read people and situations, but clearly his judgment had been completely wrong about the guard and the consequences of his actions. That evening, Marcus couldn't concentrate on anything. He kept replaying the moment when he had thrown the coffee, wondering what had possessed him to think it would be funny. He realized that his desire to create entertaining content had clouded his judgment about treating other people with respect. The next morning, Marcus woke up with a heavy feeling in his chest. He had barely slept, spending most of the night thinking about whether he should agree to meet with Private Williams. Part of him wanted to avoid the confrontation entirely, but he knew that wouldn't solve anything. After ordering room service breakfast that he barely touched, Marcus called the palace security office and agreed to the meeting. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Marcus found himself back in the same small room where he had been questioned the day before. This time, however, the atmosphere felt different. The security officials were present but remained in the background. When Private Williams entered the room, Marcus was struck by how young he looked without his ceremonial uniform. Dressed in casual civilian clothes, James Williams appeared to be about Marcus's age, with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately put Marcus at ease, despite his nervousness. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," James said, taking the seat across from Marcus. His voice was steady and polite, without any trace of anger or resentment. "I know this situation is probably confusing for you." Marcus had prepared several apologies during his sleepless night, but sitting face to face with the person he had wronged made all his planned words feel inadequate. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never meant to disrespect you or your position." "I made a terrible mistake," James nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate your apology, and I believe you when you say you didn't mean harm. But I wanted to talk to you because I think there's something important we both can learn from this situation." Marcus looked surprised. He had expected anger, demands, or formal statements, but James seemed genuinely interested in having a real conversation. "What do you mean?" "Yesterday, when you threw that coffee at me, my first thought wasn't anger," James explained. "It was disappointment, not in you specifically, but in the fact that someone saw me as nothing more than a target for entertainment. It made me realize how often people in uniform are treated as objects rather than individuals." The honesty in James's words hit Marcus harder than any anger could have. He began to understand that his prank had been more than just disrespectful. It had been dehumanizing. "I never thought about it that way," Marcus admitted. "I saw the uniform and the tradition, but I didn't think about the person wearing it." James leaned forward slightly. "That's exactly what I hoped we could discuss. You see, I chose to serve as a king's guard because I believe in something bigger than myself. Every day I stand at those gates knowing that I represent centuries of history and tradition. But I'm also just a regular person with hopes, dreams, and feelings." Marcus listened intently as James began sharing his story. He talked about growing up in a small town outside London, where his grandfather used to tell him stories about serving the crown. James had always been fascinated by history and had originally planned to become a teacher. However, after finishing university, he decided to serve in the Guard first. seeing it as a way to connect with the history he loved while serving his country. "The discipline required for this job is intense," James continued. "We train for months to maintain our composure no matter what happens around us. People try to make us laugh. They take photos, and usually we can handle anything that comes our way. But yesterday was different because it felt like a deliberate attempt to humiliate me." Marcus felt his guilt deepening with every word. "I had no idea about any of this. I just saw someone in a uniform and thought it would make good content for my blog. I realize now how selfish and thoughtless that was." To Marcus's surprise, James smiled slightly. "The reason I wanted to meet with you isn't to make you feel worse about what happened. It's because I think you genuinely didn't understand the impact of your actions, and I believe people can learn and grow from their mistakes." James went on to explain that he had watched some of Marcus's travel videos online after the incident. He had been surprised to find that most of Marcus's content was actually respectful and informative about the places he visited. "You clearly have a talent for connecting with people and sharing experiences," James said. "What happened yesterday doesn't seem to represent who you really are." Marcus was moved by James's kindness and insight. "You're being much more understanding than I deserve," he said. "I've been thinking about this constantly since yesterday, and I keep coming back to the fact that I treated you like a prop instead of a person." "That's not who I want to be," James nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that can lead to positive change. You know, this incident has made me think too. It's made me realize how important it is for people like us to have conversations about respect and understanding across different backgrounds and professions." The conversation continued for over an hour, with both men sharing their perspectives on respect, responsibility, and the power of social media to influence how people treat each other. Marcus learned about the rigorous training James had undergone, the pride he felt in his service, and his plans for the future. James learned about Marcus's passion for travel, his desire to share different cultures with his audience, and his growing understanding of the responsibility that came with having a platform. As their meeting drew to a close, James made an unexpected suggestion. "I've been thinking about your situation and the consequences you're facing. While I can't undo what happened, I might be able to help you turn this experience into something positive." Marcus looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I mean that maybe this incident could become an opportunity to create content that actually matters," James replied. "Instead of pranks that might hurt people, what if you used your platform to help others understand the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity?" The idea intrigued Marcus, but he wasn't sure what James had in mind. "Are you suggesting we work together somehow?" James smiled. "I'm suggesting that maybe we can both learn from this experience and help others learn too. But first we need to resolve the legal aspects of what happened yesterday. I'm willing to speak on your behalf if you're truly committed to making this right." 2 days after his meeting with James, Marcus received a call that would change everything. The palace security office informed him that Private Williams had indeed spoken on his behalf, and that the formal charges were being dropped. However, there were conditions attached to this decision that Marcus needed to understand and accept. Marcus arrived at the security office feeling nervous but hopeful. The same 2 officials who had questioned him earlier were waiting, along with James, who was once again in his civilian clothes. The atmosphere in the room felt more collaborative than confrontational, which gave Marcus some relief. "Mr. Thompson," the first official began, "Private Williams has made a compelling case for resolving this matter without formal prosecution. He's convinced us that you genuinely regret your actions, and that you're committed to making amends. However, this doesn't mean there are no consequences." Marcus nodded, prepared to accept whatever conditions they would impose. He was just grateful that his career and reputation might not be completely destroyed by his momentary lapse in judgment. "The conditions are as follows," the second official continued. "First, you must publicly apologize for your actions and acknowledge the disrespect you showed to the King's Guard and the institution they represent. Second, you must complete 40 hours of community service at a veterans organization here in London. Third, you will participate in an educational program about British military traditions and the significance of the King's Guard." Marcus accepted all the conditions immediately, feeling relief wash over him. But then James spoke up, adding something that hadn't been part of the official requirements. "There's one more thing I'd like to propose," James said, looking at both Marcus and the officials. I've been thinking about how we can turn this negative incident into something positive for everyone involved. Marcus has a platform that reaches thousands of people around the world. What if we use that platform to educate people about respect, understanding, and the real stories behind the traditions they encounter when they travel? The officials looked intrigued but cautious. What exactly are you suggesting, Private Williams? James had clearly thought this through carefully. I'm suggesting that Marcus and I work together to create educational content about the King's Guard and other British traditions. Real stories about the people behind the uniforms, the history and significance of these roles, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Marcus was amazed by James's generosity and creativity. You would really be willing to work with me after what I did? I think this could be more valuable than simply punishing you, James replied. Your mistake was treating me like an object instead of a person. The best way to make amends is to help others avoid making the same mistake. The officials exchanged glances before the first one spoke. This is highly unusual, but given Private Williams' exemplary record and his recommendation, we're willing to consider it. However, any content created would need to be reviewed and approved before publication. Over the following week, Marcus and James began developing their collaborative project. They met several times to discuss the format, the messages they wanted to convey, and how to make the content both educational and engaging. Marcus was impressed by James's intelligence and communication skills, while James appreciated Marcus's technical expertise and understanding of digital platforms. Their first video together was filmed at a location away from Buckingham Palace, to avoid any disruption to normal operations. In it, Marcus began by honestly explaining what had happened and sincerely apologizing for his actions. He then introduced James not as a King's Guard but as James Williams, a person who serves his country with honor. The conversation that followed was genuine and enlightening. James talked about what motivated him to serve, the training he had undergone, and the pride he felt in being part of such a historic tradition. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about the daily reality of being a guard, the challenges of maintaining composure in difficult situations, and the personal sacrifice involved in such service. What made the video special was the genuine friendship that was developing between the two men. Despite their different backgrounds and the unfortunate circumstances of their first meeting, they had discovered a mutual respect and shared interest in helping others understand the importance of treating everyone with dignity. The video concluded with both men addressing the broader issue of how social media and the desire for viral content could sometimes lead people to forget that there are real humans behind every interaction. They encouraged viewers to think before acting and to consider the impact of their behavior on others. When the video was published on Marcus's channel, the response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Viewers appreciated the honesty, the educational content, and the positive outcome that had emerged from a negative situation. Many comments praised both men for turning a mistake into a learning opportunity. The success of their first collaboration led to more projects. James, with approval from his superiors, began appearing regularly on Marcus's channel to discuss various aspects of British military history and traditions. They visited historical sites, interviewed other service members, and created content that was both entertaining and educational. Marcus's audience grew significantly, but more importantly, the quality and purpose of his content evolved. Instead of focusing on pranks and superficial entertainment, he began creating videos that helped people understand and appreciate the cultures and traditions they encountered while traveling. James, meanwhile, discovered that he had a natural talent for communication and education. His appearances on Marcus's channel led to invitations to speak at schools and community events about military service and British history. He began to see a potential career path that combined his love of history with his desire to serve the public. The partnership between Marcus and James became a case study in how conflicts could be resolved through understanding, forgiveness, and creative collaboration. Palace officials, initially skeptical of the arrangement, became supporters of the project as they saw its positive impact on public understanding and respect for the King's Guard. 6 months after the coffee incident, Marcus and James were invited to speak at a conference about digital citizenship and responsible content creation. Their story had become an example of how people could learn from mistakes and work together to create something meaningful and positive. 8 months after their first meeting, Marcus and James had become not just collaborators but genuine friends. Their partnership had grown far beyond what either of them had initially imagined. Marcus's travel blog had transformed into something much more meaningful, and James had discovered talents and opportunities he never knew existed. The success of their educational videos had caught the attention of several British cultural organizations. The British Museum reached out to them about creating content for their online education programs. The Royal Historical Society invited them to participate in a project documenting modern perspectives on traditional institutions. Even the BBC expressed interest in featuring their story in a documentary about social media, responsibility, and redemption. Marcus found himself in a completely different place in his life than he had been a year earlier. His content creation had evolved from simple travel entertainment to meaningful cultural education. His audience had grown to include teachers, students, and people genuinely interested in learning about different cultures and traditions. The change had been gradual but profound, and Marcus often reflected on how that moment of poor judgment had ultimately led him to find his true purpose. James, meanwhile, was approaching the end of his commitment to the King's Guard. His experience creating educational content with Marcus had clarified his career goals in ways he hadn't expected. He had been accepted into a graduate program in public history and museum studies, with plans to eventually work in cultural education and public outreach. Their latest project was their most ambitious yet. They were creating a series of videos that would follow James through his final months as a King's Guard, documenting not just the public-facing aspects of the role, but the personal journey of someone completing their service and transitioning to civilian life. The series was being produced in partnership with several veterans organizations and would be used to help people understand both the honor and the challenges of military service. During the filming of one episode, they met Sarah Chen, a documentary filmmaker who was working on a project about second chances and personal growth. Sarah had been following their story from the beginning and was fascinated by how they had turned a moment of conflict into an ongoing partnership that was benefiting thousands of people. "What you two have accomplished is remarkable," Sarah told them during a break in filming. "You've shown that people can learn from their mistakes and that forgiveness combined with action can create something beautiful." Sarah proposed featuring Marcus and James in her documentary, which would explore several stories of people who had overcome poor decisions to create positive change in their communities. They agreed, excited about the opportunity to share their message with an even broader audience. As they prepared for the documentary interviews, both men spent time reflecting on how much their lives had changed. Marcus had always been confident and outgoing, but he had gained a deeper understanding of responsibility and the impact of his actions on others. James had always been disciplined and thoughtful, but he had discovered his ability to communicate and inspire others. During one of their planning sessions, James brought up something that had been on his mind. "You know, Marcus, I've been thinking about what happens after I finish my service and start graduate school. I don't want our partnership to end just because my role is changing." Marcus had been thinking about the same thing. Their collaboration had become one of the most rewarding aspects of his work, and he couldn't imagine going back to creating content alone. "I've been hoping you'd say that. I think what we've built together is too valuable to let go." They began discussing the possibility of creating a formal organization focused on cultural education and digital citizenship. The idea was to help content creators understand their responsibility to their audiences and to promote respectful, educational travel and cultural exchange. The concept attracted support from unexpected sources. The incident that had brought them together had initially been seen as a public relations problem for the palace, but the positive outcome had actually enhanced public understanding and appreciation of the King's Guard. Palace officials were supportive of their educational efforts and offered to help them establish their organization. Several months later, Marcus and James officially launched the Cultural Bridge Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting respectful cultural exchange and responsible content creation. Their first major initiative was a scholarship program for content creators who wanted to focus on educational and cultural content rather than entertainment or pranks. The foundation's launch event was held at the British Museum, with attendance from educators, content creators, military personnel, and cultural organizations. During his speech at the event, Marcus shared the story of how a moment of poor judgment had led to the most meaningful work of his life. "A year ago, I thought success meant getting views and likes by any means necessary," Marcus told the audience. "I learned the hard way that real success means using whatever platform you have to make a positive difference in the world. James taught me that every person deserves respect and dignity, regardless of their role or position." James spoke about the importance of seeing beyond uniforms and roles to recognize the humanity in everyone. Marcus made a mistake, but he owned it and worked to make it right. That's the kind of character that can change the world. Our foundation exists to help others learn from our experience without having to make the same mistakes. The event was a tremendous success, with commitments for funding and partnerships that would allow the foundation to expand its programs. Media coverage of the launch focused on the positive transformation that had emerged from the original incident, reinforcing the message that people could learn, grow, and create good from their mistakes. As the evening wound down, Marcus and James stood together, looking out at the crowd of people who had come to support their mission. They had traveled an incredible journey from that moment at Buckingham Palace to this celebration of education, respect, and second chances. "Do you ever regret how we met?" Marcus asked James quietly. James smiled. "Not for a second. If you hadn't thrown that coffee at me, none of this would have happened." Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected beginnings. Their friendship had become the foundation for something much larger than either of them had imagined possible. What had started as a thoughtless prank had evolved into a movement promoting understanding, respect, and the power of taking responsibility for one's actions. 2 years after the coffee incident, Marcus and James received an invitation that would test everything they had built together. The royal family's communications office contacted them about participating in a special documentary commemorating the 150th anniversary of the modern King's Guard. The documentary would be broadcast internationally and would feature the evolution of the Guard from historical tradition to modern service. The invitation was both an honor and a challenge. While their educational work had been well received, this would be their highest profile collaboration yet. The documentary would reach millions of viewers worldwide and would represent the Guard to an international audience. The weight of responsibility was significant for both men. Marcus felt the familiar nervousness he had experienced during their early collaborations, but it was different now. Instead of worrying about his own performance, he was concerned about representing the Guard and British traditions accurately and respectfully. The thoughtless content creator who had once thrown coffee for a laugh had been replaced by someone who understood the importance of his platform and the impact of his words. James, now 6 months into his graduate studies, was excited about the opportunity to combine his academic research with practical communication. His studies in public history had given him new insights into how traditions evolve and how they can be made relevant to contemporary audiences. This documentary would allow him to put his learning into practice on a grand scale. The filming process took place over several months and included locations throughout London and beyond. Marcus and James visited the Tower of London, Windsor Castle, and various military training facilities. They interviewed current and former guards, historians, and members of the royal family's staff. Each interview added depth to their understanding of the institution they were helping to represent. One of the most meaningful interviews was with Sergeant Major Robert Harrison, who had served as a King's Guard for over 20 years, before becoming a trainer for new recruits. Harrison had heard about Marcus and James's story and was initially skeptical about involving a former troublemaker in such an important project. "I'll be honest," Harrison told them during filming. "When I first heard about this partnership, I thought it was a mistake. The Guard represents something sacred, and I didn't understand how someone who had disrespected that could help tell our story." Marcus appreciated the Sergeant Major's honesty. "I understand your concern completely. I'm still embarrassed by what I did, and I know that some people will always see me as the person who threw coffee at a guard. But I hope my work with James over the past 2 years has shown that people can change and learn." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Watching your videos and seeing how you've educated people about our traditions has changed my mind. You've helped more people understand and respect what we do than any official campaign we've ever had. Sometimes it takes an outsider to help us see ourselves clearly." The documentary also featured Marcus and James visiting James's old training grounds, where they met some of his former colleagues who were still serving. The reunion was emotional for James, who realized how much he had grown since leaving the Guard. His fellow guards were impressed by his articulate explanation of their traditions and his plans for continuing to serve the public through education. During one particularly powerful segment, Marcus and James returned to Buckingham Palace for the first time since the incident. Standing in the same spot where Marcus had thrown the coffee, they reflected on how much had changed. The location that had once represented Marcus's worst moment had become the birthplace of their friendship and their mission. Standing here now, I can barely recognize the person I was 2 years ago, Marcus said to the camera. I was so focused on creating content that would get attention that I forgot about treating people with basic respect and dignity. This spot reminds me every day of how important it is to think before acting. James added, this place represents tradition, service, and duty, but it also represents forgiveness, growth, and the possibility of turning mistakes into opportunities to help others. Marcus's actions here led to something neither of us could have imagined. The most challenging part of the documentary was addressing the criticism they had received from some quarters. Not everyone had been supportive of their partnership. Some people felt that Marcus should not have been given such a prominent platform after his disrespectful actions. Others questioned whether the royal family should be associated with someone who had shown such poor judgment. During a panel discussion filmed for the documentary, they addressed these concerns directly. A historian who had initially criticized their partnership was invited to share her perspective. My concern was that by working with Mr. Thompson, the institution was sending a message that disrespectful behavior could be rewarded, Dr. Margaret Foster explained. I worried about setting a precedent that people could gain fame and access through negative actions. Marcus responded thoughtfully. I understand that concern, and I think it's important to address it. I never sought out this partnership or asked for forgiveness. James offered it, and I had to prove through my actions that I deserved it. If someone thinks they can replicate what I did to gain attention or access, they should know that what I went through was difficult, humbling, and required genuine change. James supported his friend's response. The key difference is accountability and genuine remorse. Marcus didn't just apologize, he changed his entire approach to content creation and dedicated himself to education and respect. That's not something that can be faked or sustained without genuine commitment. Dr. Foster acknowledged their points and admitted that their work over the past 2 years had exceeded her expectations. I still have reservations about the message this sends, but I cannot deny the positive impact of your educational efforts. You've reached audiences that traditional institutions struggle to engage. The documentary's climax featured Marcus and James presenting their Cultural Bridge Foundation's latest initiative, an international exchange program that would bring young content creators to the UK to learn about British traditions and history. In return, British students would travel to other countries to learn about different cultures and create respectful, educational content about their experiences. The program had attracted participants from over 30 countries and had partnerships with museums, universities, and cultural organizations worldwide. What had started as a response to one incident of disrespect had grown into a global movement promoting cultural understanding and responsible communication. As filming concluded, both men reflected on how the documentary process had deepened their understanding of their mission and their friendship. They had faced criticism and challenges, but they had also seen the impact of their work on countless individuals who had learned from their story. The documentary's director, Emma Richardson, told them during wrap-up interviews that their story had changed her own perspective on forgiveness and second chances. When I started this project, I thought it would be primarily about military tradition. Instead, it became a story about human growth, friendship, and the power of turning negative experiences into positive change. 5 years after the coffee incident that changed both their lives, Marcus and James stood before an audience of international educators, diplomats, and content creators at the United Nations headquarters in New York. They had been invited to present their Cultural Bridge Foundation's work as part of a global summit on digital citizenship and cross-cultural understanding. The journey from that moment of poor judgment at Buckingham Palace to this prestigious platform had been remarkable. Their foundation now operated in over 50 countries, had reached millions of people through educational content, and had trained thousands of content creators in responsible and respectful communication about different cultures. Marcus, now 33, had become a recognized expert in digital cultural education. His transformation from a prank-focused travel blogger to a serious educator had been complete and genuine. Universities invited him to speak about the responsibility of digital influencers, and his content was used in media literacy programs around the world. James, who had completed his graduate studies with honors, was now the Foundation's Director of Cultural Programs. His academic research on public history and digital media had been published in several journals, and he was considered one of the leading voices on how traditional institutions could engage with modern audiences authentically and effectively. Their UN presentation focused on the lessons they had learned about conflict resolution, forgiveness, and the power of collaborative solutions to cultural misunderstandings. The audience included ambassadors, educators, and technology leaders who were working to address the growing challenges of online harassment, cultural insensitivity, and digital division. 5 years ago, I made a decision that hurt someone and disrespected an important tradition, Marcus told the assembly. That moment could have defined me as someone who made a mistake and faced consequences. Instead, because of James's extraordinary generosity and wisdom, it became the beginning of the most meaningful work of my life. James continued their presentation by explaining how their partnership had evolved. What we learned is that conflict often comes from misunderstanding and dehumanization. When people see others only in terms of their roles or stereotypes, it becomes easier to treat them disrespectfully. Our work focuses on helping people see the humanity in everyone they encounter, whether online or in person. They shared statistics about their foundation's impact. Over 3 million people had participated in their online courses about cultural sensitivity. Their educational videos had been viewed more than 50 million times, and their exchange programs had created lasting connections between young people from dozens of countries. One of the most powerful parts of their presentation was a video montage featuring testimonials from people whose lives had been changed by their programs. A young woman from Japan spoke about how their cultural education helped her create respectful content about her travels through Europe. A teenager from Brazil described how their materials helped him understand and address his own unconscious biases when creating content about indigenous communities in his country. The testimonials included military personnel from various countries who had used their educational materials to help the public understand the human side of military service. Teachers shared stories about how their resources had helped students develop empathy and critical thinking skills about cultural differences. After their presentation, during the question and answer session, an ambassador from Kenya asked them about the role of forgiveness in their success. Your story is inspiring, but it seems to depend on an extraordinary level of forgiveness from Private Williams. How can this model be applied when such forgiveness isn't offered or isn't possible? James answered thoughtfully. You're right that forgiveness played a crucial role in our story, and I was fortunate to be in a position where I could offer it. But I think the more important lesson is about taking responsibility for harm you've caused, regardless of whether forgiveness is offered. Marcus didn't just apologize. He fundamentally changed his behavior and dedicated himself to making amends through action. Marcus added, even if James hadn't forgiven me or wanted to work with me, I still would have needed to learn from my mistake and find ways to contribute positively to the world. Forgiveness is a gift, but personal growth and responsibility are choices that don't depend on others. The session concluded with announcements about new partnerships between their foundation and several UN agencies. UNESCO would be incorporating their cultural sensitivity training into their education programs. The UN's Department of Global Communications would be using their materials to train their social media teams. The International Olympic Committee had requested their help in creating guidelines for respectful coverage of different cultures during international sporting events. That evening, at a reception for summit participants, Marcus and James found themselves reflecting on how far they had come. They were surrounded by people whose work they admired, discussing collaborations that could impact millions of lives, and planning programs that would promote understanding across cultural and national boundaries. Do you think we would have found this path if we had met under different circumstances? Marcus asked James as they looked out over the New York skyline. James considered the question carefully. I think we both had the capacity for this work within us, but I don't know if we would have discovered it without that catalyst moment. Sometimes it takes a crisis or a mistake to show us who we really want to become. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Sarah Kim, a representative from the MacArthur Foundation, who had been observing their work for several months. She approached them with news that would mark another milestone in their journey. I wanted to let you know that the Foundation's board has decided to award you both a collaborative fellowship for your work in digital citizenship and cultural bridge building, Dr. Kim announced. The fellowship will provide funding for you to expand your programs globally and to develop new approaches to addressing online cultural conflicts. The MacArthur Fellowship was one of the most prestigious recognitions in their field, often called the Genius Grant. For Marcus and James, it represented not just financial support, but validation that their work was making a real difference in the world. As they accepted congratulations from other summit participants, Marcus thought about the young man who had thrown coffee at a guard 5 years earlier. That person seemed like a stranger now, someone whose motivations and thought processes he could barely remember. The growth had been gradual but profound, shaped by friendship, responsibility, and a deepening understanding of his impact on others. James reflected on his own journey from a disciplined but reserved guard to someone who was comfortable speaking to international audiences about complex social issues. His military service had given him a foundation of discipline and duty, but his partnership with Marcus had taught him about communication, collaboration, and the power of second chances. Later that week, back in London, they received a letter that brought their story full circle. It was from the current captain of the King's Guard, informing them that their educational materials were being incorporated into the training program for new guards. Future guards would learn not just about their duties and traditions, but about their role as cultural ambassadors and the importance of seeing every interaction as an opportunity to build understanding. The letter concluded with an invitation for them to address the next class of guard trainees, sharing their story as an example of how conflicts could be transformed into opportunities for growth and positive change. As they prepared for this homecoming of sorts, Marcus and James realized that their story had come to represent something larger than their individual journey. It had become a testament to the possibility of redemption, the power of forgiveness, and the potential for any mistake to become the beginning of something meaningful and good.